Oh, okay. Pandemic Rant. What is that, May 3rd? Um, so once again, I didn't manage to make a morning sit down over coffee and dairies or vape, as the case may be. Um, and so I'm leaving it for this afternoon. At this stage, I haven't actually uploaded it yet, but last night I did watch a TV series, and I mentioned that I would talk about some of the issues. Well, today after my long day, I came home back onto Netflix. And there's another TV series. I'm a binge watcher. Um, which I watched the first season of a little while ago, and I've just seen that season 2 is on, and it's called Easy. And I'm just partway um, through it at the moment. And funnily enough, similar themes popping up, um, which I always find really interesting. And I think it's in part a sign of the times of what's going on in our society right now. One of the things I find really interesting is that, especially with Netflix funded shows, um, they're like constantly really similar themes. Did I just say that? Probably. Um, so one of the themes for me, which keeps coming up, which I have a real interest in thinking and discussing, is the practice of non-monogamy. Um, whether that's open, polyamorous, I don't know what other terminologies there are, um, casuals, um, and there's a lot of information around on the interwebs and the things that we're exposed to watching um, in TV series and films, also in like YouTube clips, TED Talks, documentaries, and there's heaps of it. I'd be really surprised to encounter anyone in this day and age who doesn't really know what polyamory is. If you don't know, poly, multiple, amor, love, so multiple lovers. Um, and oh, I don't know if I actually feel like really delving into this rant right now. Now that I've started, which would be typical me. Um, so I do not practice, but the theory interests me, and the social connotations interest me too. And the way people receive the idea also interests me. For those who are passionately for, those who are passionately against, and the indifference. Um, I think one thing when you're dealing with topics like this, when you're just the average kind of Joe like myself, um, it's quite hard to kind of discuss and communicate this whole idea of the open discourse that I'm going for here and the stream of consciousness. When we talk about complex issues like this in a very direct manner, it's quite hard to find the right words and phrases. And one of the things I find interesting is that with these big complex ideas, they actually translate a lot better in story frames. Um, so, like TV series, watching the way people deal with these issues, um, especially since it's kind of in many ways, shapes, or forms a really conflicting subject. Like our generation, the Disney generation, generations pre-hand, there's this that whole the one obsession, which I think so many of us will have been guilty of. I mean, I certainly was growing up. That ideology that you find this one perfect being, and Greek mythology's twin souls concept. Idea that everybody was born with, two heads and four arms and four legs, um, and that they had one soul and were joined at the belly button. And as punishment, Zeus, good old Zeus, threw down his lightning bolt and severed everyone. So we walk around with one head and two arms and two legs, and only half a soul. And that's poetic. There's a beautiful, romantic ideal, but how fucking practical is it, really? Especially when we think about the society that we live in now, age of the internet, accessibility to information, to people, our heightened levels of connectivity. I mean, it's a lot easier to envision, say, like even 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Or even we want to go back into, 50 years ago, the 60s. Ooh, it'll be like the 70s. Jeez. Okay. I'm still in a time machine, clearly. Anyway, it's easier to kind of understand the need for this idea of, like having one person that fits everything, and maybe you're just lucky enough to find them, and maybe you're not. But because we were not, people weren't as accessible. Also, social constructs like, frowning on divorce and, living out of wedlock and all that kind of social shebang. The fuck am I even saying? Really, I'm really good at ranting on and on and on and not really saying anything at all, which is kind of ridiculous. Yeah, so I think, back in the day, this idea of, monogamy was a lot more practical than it is now. And I think considering that we live in an age where we are really open about ideas, there's a big acceptance of people exploring sexuality and exploring identity. And so polyamory sort of pops up in there, it kind of ties in. I can remember my first proper introduction to the idea of polyamory was my first or second stint at university, and I met this amazing young woman who Norwegian, Swedish, I can't quite remember. And I was really enchanted just by her charismatic freedom, like she just seemed so comfortable with herself, and so full of life, and so willing to explore and experience everything. And I remember talking to her about, I don't even know how we got onto the subject, but her and her partner were both bisexual, and I think we were talking about ideologies that surround that. And I remember her talking about how that what you fall in love with isn't a body or a set of genitalia or any kind of identity. The thing that you fall in love with is the energy that someone has, and the way that makes you feel too, about yourself, about the world, about everything. It's this give and take, it's this share. And if that's what inspires you to want to form some kind of connectivity with someone, then why should that be limited? This concept that, oh, I'm just really not doing very well with this. There's just so much I want to say about it, and I'm just half distracted for wanting to get this right. I think this is a subject that I feel quite passionately about exploring because it deals with the concept of love, which is just huge. Like that's such a big emotional core, and it is so ill defined. I think we have so many misconceptions around what love is. And again, it's so abstract because it's variable. I really honestly don't believe any two people experience love in the same ways. And there's so many different types of love. There's a biological type of love. Um, there's a insane type of love. There's non-sexual love. There's just so many different categories of it. Then we don't even think about that. Like the majority of the time when we talk about love, we think about it as being this one thing. Um, and it's interesting to me to think about how, for some reason, we have this idea that that there's kind of a finite amount of love. And I'm sure there'll be heaps of people who argue and find that kind of difficult. But